go ahead and turn in our packets, just like that, to the back page, which says speech transitions. You don't have, yes, no, you do not have this. You're welcome. If you'll notice on the front page there, it is titled Signal Phrases, Summarizing, Paraphrasing, and Quoting. This handout was provided last time to give you some information about when we talked about, like, when do you quote, when do you paraphrase, when do you summarize. So we talked about that, and these are different ways that you can simply introduce that information rather than being like, according to so-and-so, or Joan states, right? Like, we can utilize some other different ways of effectively using our signal phrases, but also to introduce quotes, explain the quotes, so like following up on them, and then introducing statistics, etc. So feel free to explore these simply as different options for your language. Also, I printed it out because I believe that just keeping this in your back pocket for future writing is always helpful to expand your different ways of doing so. The other thing that's on here is this thing called linking words. And I'll talk a little bit more about those when we get to signposts, but these linking words are other great transition and phrases in order to connect ideas to each other. And that's a really important thing for all of us, especially when we're trying to explain a bigger concept to our audience. On the back page here are these things called speech transitions. Friends, this is no new information. However, let's expand upon our idea of transitions as well. And I'm going to talk to you about this idea of transitions. Then we'll refer to any questions that you may have. Then we'll move to visual aids, and we'll talk about what visual aids are and how to use them effectively in the classroom or any presentation that you give. And then we will go over your speech checklist and your rubric to ensure, one, you know what you need to bring on your speech day, and two, that you know exactly what you'll be graded on so that there's no surprises. What are transitions? Friends, as it says here, and as we know, transitions are a way of letting your audience know that you are changing ideas. It is generally best to write clear and concise, complete sentences for your transitions. We know this because it helps who? In the audience. That's what the purpose of writing these clear, concise, complete sentences. And make sure that we're always writing in complete sentences, but in the transitions particularly. So why do we use transitions? Well, our transitions and our speech and everything that we are talking about should be incredibly clear to the audience. Our job throughout our speech is to communicate clearly a concept or an idea that our audience has not a lot of information or knowledge about. So making sure that we are holistically explaining it will be the first step. But oftentimes transitions can be very useful to keep your audience not only on track, but also get them to understand how ideas connect to each other. So they assist in the clarity as well. Not just something to keep us all on the same track, but they can assist clarifying how one, maybe idea, relates to another. And then when do you use them? Well, every time you change ideas, you should use them after your introduction, in between your main points, and right before the conclusion. Here are some suggestions for your transition style. And let's talk about this in a different form than how we've learned it before. Although the pattern of transitions that we've learned before, being signpost, main point, central idea, is great. And you are more than welcome to continue to use that. And also remember why we do so. It's not necessarily for ourselves, and nobody thinks you're being redundant. It's simply a nice way of doing what? Helping out the audience. There you go. And also reminding the audience what the entirety of your purpose in speaking is. However, in this speech, as well as the persuasive speech, you are not required to include the central idea in your transitions. You can, if you think that's going to be helpful to your audience. Is this imperative for me to communicate that central idea when going into the next point? Or did my main point already do its job? And in turn, I now would like to preview something in a different way. So let me show you how this goes. So the idea of the first transitional mechanism is this review preview. We've done the review preview before. We review what we just spoke about, and then we preview what we are going to speak about. The thing that you can do is you can review. We spoke a little bit about, and you can even give your subpoints if you wanted to, as a friendly reminder. So it'd be like, I talked to you about the 3 different causes of blank, 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 and blank. Now, let's see how those causes are impacting the community that we are looking at. And we'll be doing that in 3 specific ways as well. And then you can go into it. So instead of having to say, like, next I'll tell you about blank so that you can understand how la 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 la, we can start to make those connections. Here's what we just did. And in speeches of chronological order, or even potentially like cause and effect, it may work rather well to use the idea of the connection rather than simply restating the central idea. So you can always do that review preview. And if you see something here, it says examples. Now that we've established a need for fundraising, so that first main point must have been about what? There you go, fundraising, huh? Let's see which fundraisers might be most effective. I will focus on 2 types of fundraisers, silent auctions and sales. So this next main point is clearly going to be types of fundraisers. And then they're focusing on silent auctions and sales. The A and the B are the silent auctions and sales. So feel free to break it down like that if you would like to as well, or remind us of the subpoints, however you would like to do it. In short, fundraising efforts are needed because budget reductions and increased expenses. So this is where we summarize what happened in the last point, and then we move to the next one. Next, we'll look at our fundraising options. Does that make sense to y'all? So we can expand it out a little bit. We can highlight some of the main points if you wanted to. You can also work to suggest a connection between the first point and the last point. We're on the signaling phrases handout. And we're on the back page of the transitions. The next one is a rhetorical question, and I think this is a great idea. You're like, wait, Amanda, isn't that an attention-getting device? You're right, everyone. It is. But rhetorical questions can also be used in your transitions. Start to think about your audience. What does my audience know, or do they know anything about my topic? What questions would somebody have who wasn't this knowledgeable? And that should also guide your introduction, your background information. But what that can also do is it can assist in creating these things called rhetorical questions as transitions. We know that a rhetorical question doesn't demand an answer because it leads the audience to the answer itself. By knowing, maybe we don't even have to answer it because all of you know. But this one would be a question that would, in fact, answer and follow up with it. So a leading question that then follows up. So the question is something like, will fundraising be too expensive to start up? Because that may be one of the questions that your audience is answering. And then you can answer it, actually, fundraising is cheaper than any alternative. And then the next main point would clearly be your alternatives. Good job, everybody. So we could say something like, you may be wondering how these causes came to be. Let me give you a little bit of information about that. So we can always ask a question going in. Now that you understand the system itself, you may be thinking, who in the world is backing and supporting this? I have 2 people. First is the governor, and second is the laws. I don't know, right? So this is like an example from my last class. So this is how you could do it and go into your next ones. There is also signposting. Signposting is very important. One, in the main transitions, so like the first, the second, the third, lets us know that we're switching ideas to begin next, finally, starting off. Let's move on to the next point. Here we go. Let's summarize them. So you can use those different types of signposts, but what I want each of you to be aware of are the signposts that are imperative for inside of your main points. We talked about this a little last time in regards to your subpoints. For example, let's say that you have subpoints that, like, I'm going to list 3 causes. So your subpoints should have some indication or signpost there. The first cause, the second cause, the third cause. Does that make sense? Or you could say the first form of, the second form of, third form of. However you can do that by giving us some signposts. And remember that there's an entire list of these signposts again in transition words and phrases if you wanted to, so that you could connect these ideas and potentially use some different options. So fun. Time. Yeah, immediately at the present soon. Oh, so good. So feel free to look through those signposts, but start with the signpost word and then complete the sentence for a transition. Signpost words like next, first, last, now we turn. On the other hand, finally, now let's consider if you think that's shocking. Similarly, and yet, altogether, at present, etc. So that would be very fun. Also for getting to like problems or you're listing out the effects. If you think that's shocking, wait till you hear this next one, right? And there's just fun words to move people along. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I think so. And then the last thing are these themed transitions. Y'all, themed transitions are my favorite. It's hard to get a themed transition within a speech that already is heavy, if you will. I always kind of think of a theme like, oh, I love a theme party and I love a costume and a theme's so fun. But we have to also watch out for themes and remember the general tone of our speech overall. It doesn't mean that we always have to be smiling, because we're not going to be smiling at topics that are often sad as well. But in the case of themed transitions, there are effective ways to do it without being too cheeky and too up in regards to the tone of a speech. This individual, or at least this theme transition here, is one that was talking about bacterial meningitis. And it started out with a story about a woman who had contracted bacterial meningitis. And then throughout each of the transitions, they were able to use that same idea or story to take you on a walk through. If like there's something topical in that case, you could do so chronologically. You could take the same person and be like, I'm like Jessica, blah, 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 whatever. But as you see here, an option is to carry an example throughout the speech. Let's say you tell a shocking story about a college student named Sarah containing bacterial meningitis in the introduction. Well, the transitions may look something like this. Like Sarah, each of you are at risk for contracting bacterial meningitis. Right? Let's talk more specifically about how you can contract the disease. So then we get you set up. We place a little fear in there, right? This is you. Watch out. You're getting it. No. But then we go, unlike Sarah, you have the ability to prevent bacterial meningitis. Transition into the other one, and then as you go forward, studying for finals and getting all stressed out, keep Sarah in mind and her strategy that she used. And don't be like Sarah, something like that. Don't be like Sarah. So if you had a story at the beginning and you wanted to take that theme throughout the entire speech, you could. I've had great speeches like this, and you can always think about this for future speeches that you do in other classes. Keep a theme idea. It's just a fun way to do it rather than a simple PowerPoint. Let's say you were talking about a particular place or talking about a particular concept or an event or a person. You could always think about taking on the role of museum curator or something like that, right? Or historian. Or I had a student. Did I ever tell you about my student from Singapore? I had a student. I used to teach an international class at Santa Monica College, a public speaking class, and this one student was from Singapore, and so her speech was on traveling and some of the sights to see there. So she talked to everybody in the class as if they were on an airplane going to Singapore. She was like, ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for our final descent to Singapore, I'd like to, as a native of the area for so and so many years, building your credibility in, I'd like to welcome you to our destination and also give you some insight from my perspective on 3 places you won't want to miss while you're visiting your tour. So you could do something. The other thing that I've seen really effectively done, I actually had a cheerleader here at LMU. This is my first semester teaching. And did I tell you already? No. Okay, you all just have to tell me because sometimes I don't remember which stories I've told which class. And she did her speech on going to cheer nationals. I think it was like right after she had like been in high school cheer, so she talked about going to nationals. So she talked to us all like we were part of the team. Yay, team! We're on our way to nationals. We have some things to do. First, we have to prepare a routine, and then we're going to have to talk about our practices, and then finally, I'll talk to you about what we're going to do once we get down to Florida. And it was like, we got our routine. Good job, everyone. Now we're going to need to speak about those practices because we have to put in a long time. Right? So it was just pretty much talking about that. And then the last one was my student on Alcatraz. I told you about that. Oh, y'all, this is so fun. So this is, and we'll talk about this a little bit with the visual aid, but one of my students was an architecture major. She did this huge model of Alcatraz. So what she did, she flipped it on its side, and she talked to all of us like we were the inmates coming for the first time. And so she was giving us like an overview of what we were going to, what our stay there was going to be like. So it was like bringing us in, and then once we're done here, we're going to go and check you into your rooms or whatever. And so then she talked about that. It's like, if you're lucky and you're well-behaved, you'll get to go out to the yard. And it was like, here's the yard, and talk to us all about the yard. And you'll never get off the rock because it's whatever. It was a fun idea. So consider that for the future of your speaking events as well, because I guarantee you not a lot of people are doing that in your class. You can be a real standout character, friends. So try to incorporate some of these concepts or ideas into your own speech, specifically when it comes to transitions within your main points, and trying to make a connection for the audience to be more clear in how points connect to each other, how ideas maybe connect, what steps were needed before the next thing happens. Simply following a logical process, and oftentimes using easy connective words can take care of that for you. Sound good? All right, team. So keep these transitions then in your back pocket. You can continue to utilize them and go forward as you write, not only in this class, but also in others. And for the next purpose of today, we are going to go ahead and talk about visual aids. Yay! On the back side here, you will see this technological breakdown. Visual aids are one of those things that individuals want to use all the time, but they also require a lot of prep work and responsibility. And that means not only outside of this class, but inside. If I am not up here before the 10 minutes to 2:40, so like if I'm not up here by 12:30 when the other class gets out, make sure that if it's speech day, you're coming in. Come in and get your visual aids saved to the desktop. Should you be using computer visual aids? Get them saved to the desktop before class starts. You only have 1 minute in between speeches to set up your materials. So if you have a visual aid and then you come up and you're trying to do it in between your speech, that's already not going to work because it'll be too much time out of your speech. And then in between that 1 minute, it may not be enough to get it all set up. So when you come in, you'll come in, you'll sign up on the board, you'll give the evaluation sheet with your outline attached, and then get your visual aids saved to the desktop and sit down. So how am I going to save it to the desktop? Well, I am going to bring a flash drive with that information on it, or I will email it to myself, download it, and save it. Flash drive, I believe, is always the best because I can't tell you how. The pickle is that so many people are going to be delivering that day, and then when they all open up their emails and click on it, and then somebody signs another person out, and then it goes away, and then they have to come back in and sign it up. Over my time, I've learned the process of these ideas. I'm going to just turn down my text message on my phone. So you're going to save it to the desktop. If I am not here, you'll see that this is the media box that I'm talking about. So this is it here. On this box, it has everything that you see on the screen, and that is going to go ahead and access the computer, the document camera, and the projector. Right now, it says that the projector is on. There we go. The light, however, just isn't in there. If the projector is not on when I get here, go ahead and turn the projector on and go ahead and turn the computer on. Those are the first things. So turning the computer and the projector on, if you see it there. First, make sure that the computer tower, and the computer tower is underneath here. Just takes a button to push. And then screen itself are both on. Then the computer login, it should be computer login. Should it not be on? You'll see here. It's going to look like so. It'll basically have your classroom name and number on it. And then, there we go. It'll have the classroom name. And then right in here, all you are going to put is the password. And the password is instructor1 with a capital I and then the number 1. If you can't remember that, it's also right here on the board next to us. So I'm going to go ahead and put in and okay, great. I got a lot of it. Awesome. Once the computer is on, then you can click the button projector screen, and that will also then turn on the projector screen. Then, friends, to turn on that projector, we'll go to the next one. On the projector screen controls, so there'll be a new screen that looks like that. You will go ahead and click the on button, if you notice that nice little arrow. I'm sure you could if these lights were on as well. Maybe in front? What do you think? 700 right here. Okay, good to know. This one's here in case you need better light for your visual aid. Okay. The on will appear green when it is in fact on. Then, if you see over there on the right-hand side, that's the screen. It's what makes that go up and down. There's also a button on the wall that you can do it if it's not already up or already down, but the other way that you can do it is from the actual box here itself to make that go up and down. If you are starting a computer working with, video or audio, please be sure that the volume is up, which is right there. You'll see that little button up with volume. And also make sure that the mute button, which is right next to it, number 4, is activated. It's activated when it's yellow, and if it's not, then it's red. So you'll be able to see that. But if you are using video, I encourage you to make sure that that is turned or on, the volume. Also that the volume is all the way up. And make sure that on whatever application, like YouTube you're using, is all the way up, and that it's also up on the computer. There's 3 different places that you have to make sure that the volume is working. And I would do a practice run just to make sure that the sound is there and get that up and going. How to get to the home screen. Now, the home screen is where you can access everything. This was simply just to get to turning it on. So you can always, if you come in and the home screen is on, which is that 3rd slide down there on the left-hand, or this one here, the 2nd row left-hand side, how to get to the home screen is hitting that return button. That return button will always take you back. It's like your iPhone circle button, which they don't even really have anymore on the new ones. Jackson has it. You know that? On the new iPhones, the 10s? They just don't have the button?
Yeah.
It's very annoying. I'm always like, what? Oh, huh? Where do I push? And then it's like, that's not your face. I'm like, oh, goodness. All right. On any page, you'll be able to always go back to the home button by touching the return on the top left-hand corner. The only page the return button is not on is like the home page itself. So you can always get back to any home page. So you'll know you're not on the home screen in that way. The home screen has everything that you need, all. It has something for your PC. If you push the PC button, it displays the PC. Good job. Whatever's reflected here. If you push the document camera, it's going to display whatever's on the document camera. Woo-hoo! How great is that title?
Oh my gosh.
Right? Can there be no trust between a kidnapper and his hostages anymore? So funny. Okay. So these are the 2 that you will be using, I believe, in most often. However, if you did want to bring in your own laptop, you just have to make sure that you have your proper cables to connect to that. And I would practice with it beforehand because the PC Mac compatibility. Okay. The most important button on the home screen is the projector mute button. Do we all see where that is? That projector mute button? This button creates the dark screen. So that's what allows me to toggle back and forth between visual aids or prepare something without you already seeing it so that you don't, it's almost like giving the punchline before you give the joke. You don't want your audience to see your visual aid before you're showing it. So it'll allow you to mess around, and then when you're ready to re-show it again, you can open this up. The other rule is that you aren't allowed, and just, it's a rule for this class, but it's a rule for the purpose of being an effective speaker, is that you are not able, you can just pull that out and text, honey, it's okay. Then, or go and text. I don't, it's just better because I get distracted. So the idea is that you only display information when you're referring to it. So don't have anything up behind you if you're not going to be talking about it at that time. It simply becomes a distraction. So instead, using the projector mute button or the projector black button, dark, what is it, projector? Oh, I guess it's projector black. I thought it was projector mute. So you know that it's working when it's red. When it is yellow is when it is active. When it's red, it's not active. But you'll be able to see that. And the final thing that we have here is the document camera. I love a good document camera. It is always a great backup tool, especially when we can't rely on technology. And so instead, you can really take any document that there is, and you can simply place it on the document camera. It'll be blue when it's on. It's red when it's not. So if you're the first one to get here, it's helpful if you just... It's always in this, and it's so heavy. I think it just needs armor roll or something. So you'll just pull it out, and then we simply push this up and turn on the power button there. So when the power button is on, it is on. I don't know if you can see it. I can totally display it. So here's your power button, and then these are the best parts, which is going to be the zoom and the unzoom. The good news about this is that you can really get as close to something as you want. Wow, somebody's nail got to grow out. Look at this hangnail. Oy vey. Here, look at my ring. It's or something for here. Not with disgusting hands. You can seriously get so close, though. Isn't that crazy? So if you have a small artifact, look at that. I mean, that's well, I guess too close. Back it up, back it up. Now I'm just playing around. Okay, you get it. But if you had a small artifact or something that you wanted to display for the audience in order to ensure everybody could see it, this would be a wonderful way for you to do it. You can also simply put your pictures up here, show and describe to us, like so, without ever having to turn your head to the away from the audience, and then you can take it away. Does that make sense to everybody? You can also have it wonderfully set before you deliver so that when you're ready, you just simply turn it over and reveal. And then you're ready to go. That is the technology. I'll have each of you come up and touch it because kinesthetic learning is the best for something like this. It's kind of hard to be like, click and go, and you're not clicking or going anywhere. So I will walk you through that, but in the meantime, do any of these directions on the back side present you with confusion or something that you're like, that doesn't make any sense, man? Or you feel okay with it? Okay. Let's go okay right now, maybe? All right. And then you let me know if there's anything else. Let's talk about what visual aids are and what they aren't. What are visual aids? Well, it's built into the word. They are visual representations that are going to aid in your presentation. Think of a visual aid like a supporting material. Its purpose should only be used during that time of which you are supporting an idea. So it is used to assist you in doing a couple of different things. One, it helps you to clarify. So the purpose of a visual aid should be to clarify. Make clear what you are talking about. We can do that with our words, but oftentimes simply showing a visual representation is not only a great reinforcement, but it's also a way that we're all on the same page to make sure. We talked about that with examples as well. The other thing it's there to do is gain interest. Visual aids are fun. It's fun to look at a visual, and it's fun to watch what's happening or going on. So feel free to gain our excitement, our interest with that. And then it's also used to reinforce ideas. We spoke about this, I don't know if we did speak about this, but if I was telling you how to make something, let's say I was talking about how to make a specific food, and I did so without showing you the visual aids, that would be a hot mess to begin with. But what it can help to do is that when we show you and we tell you and then we show you again, it can help that reinforcement. That repetition is one of those things that can help individuals recall and help us to remember what we were talking about. If your visual aid doesn't satisfy these requirements, I'm going to have you take a second guess on whether or not it needs to be used. A visual aid for visual aid's sake isn't so great. It's almost as using the attention getter, just asking a question to have a visual aid or have one, but you know it doesn't work very well. So make sure that your visual aid is being clearly placed into, oh yeah, this is clear, and this does help to, gain interest in my audience, or this does help reinforce something. I had a student one time who, did I tell you he's doing a speech on Cuba? Came in, put up former Cuban flag, talked about Cuba, sat down. The whole time I was like, flag, flag, what's this flag? Good flag, this is so interesting, flag. So I'd much rather look at the flag than look at that, but it had no purpose, never talked about it, never referenced it. Had it up there just to have it up as a backdrop and then sat back down. You can use anything really as a visual aid. I'm going to give you some ideas. The one thing that I never encourage you to do and that you should never touch again in a public speech is something called a poster board. Many of you may have done a poster board when you were younger, but a poster board violates every single guideline and rule requirement for making an effective visual aids. Poster boards are done in things like science fairs or something, where people can come around and they can read all that small content that you wrote out, and they can look at all the millions of pictures that are on there, and they can enjoy the glitter and different fonts and colors and the strings that you have attached. But the thing about that poster board is it isn't interactive, and it isn't it's something that you would need to do individually rather than as a whole. You would need to come up and participate with that, and the opportunity isn't there. So when you have a poster board, it really becomes something of a distraction as well. We can't see all the pictures. We don't know what they're in reference to. We're certainly not looking at the font. So don't use them ever again if you're speaking in public, but you can use them, of course, if you are doing a science fair or some other kind of booth extravaganza where people can read the information on their own. However, here are some that you can use. First, an object, anything that's tangible. I have a student who's going to be doing, I'm not quite sure what he's doing in my other class, but I know that he's bringing in 4 different objects, and he's going to be handing them out to prove a point at the beginning of his speech, and then with those people doing an example, and then he's going to come back in. But anything that's tangible you can bring in. So like I was saying, if you have specific objects, or if you're talking about a topic whereby the audience may need a referral of those objects, you can always bring them in. One speech that I saw that was super cool was a speech about alkaline water. Have you ever heard about alkaline water? I mean, well, I guess, what is it? Most waters are claiming to be alkaline waters, much like that of Smart Water. A balanced pH. It's the big deal. You don't do pH in high school biology and stuff, where you'd either swab your cheek to see what your own pH was, or you'd put the drops in to check the pH levels of any type of fluid, right? So this idea now is that if your pH is really well balanced, it helps to fight and combat things like disease. It really helps to keep you hydrated, because oftentimes our water doesn't have an appropriate pH for our specific bodies. And so oftentimes, especially with bottled waters, they will fall in a range that isn't, in fact, an alkaline or a balanced pH. You don't want it too high, you don't want it too low. I think the money spot is 6 or 7. So what this student did is they took one of the pH strips and they blew it up so that we could see the numbers and the colors that changed. And then what the student also did was she took a cup of water, and right behind each cup of water it had like every single type of bottled water that you'd ever think of. It was like Aquafina, Dasani, blah, 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 and she went all the way down. And so she went through, and as she was talking, she went and she poured each of the waters in the cups right in front of the scale. And then she said, now, well, let's see what each of these waters, what their pH is, and if they are really keeping you hydrated. So then she went down and she did a drop in each one. Clearly she's practiced this. And she did each one lined up with the color in front of it and the number. And it was like, whoa! And then her big claim was, but if you buy into those alkaline machines, have you ever seen those? They're like $5,000 a machine, but it basically does your tap water, and it can also turn anything almost like a tab into perfectly alkaline water. So what she did then is she took the alkaline water and she went deep, 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 and it turned every single one the perfect color of blue to balance its pH. And it was like, oh my, but all these objects really helped us to illuminate it, to show us, to whatever. Just as simple and basic as if we were doing something like, to inform you all about downhill snow skiing. We're going to talk to you about the equipment you need, the different types of slopes, and some places you can downhill ski as a college student. I don't know. But how many of us have been snow skiing before? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 people. How many of us have been to the snow? I didn't go to the snow for the first time until I was 27 years old and moved to New York City. So, and I grew up in California. My parents just never, snow wasn't a thing. I don't know how to ski. I don't know how to snowboard. I also don't like cold. All those things were probably built in. However, if I was doing a speech on like the equipment needed, and my audience did not know about it, that may be a good thing to bring in. Because if we talk about things like boots, an individual who doesn't have any reference, who's never been to the snow before, who's never been snow skiing, and although you may think, oh yeah, boots, those are totally different for something like skiing, right? Or like bindings or gear or anything like that. So this may be objects that will help inform you a bit more. So feel free to bring in an object should you want to. The other thing that you can do is you can bring in a model. What? Hey, Tyra. Sure, if you want to. Does anyone ever know Tyra Banks anymore? Exactly. Yeah. Tyra? Okay, good. Yeah, I'm hoping that we do. Tyra Banks. You watch The Top Model? You used to watch The Top Model? Is The Top Model on anymore?
No.
Oh, right.
It's just like
Reruns. Revisit the Top Model work. My neighbor upstairs was on Top Model back in the day. She walked into my house and I was like, I know you. Top Model. Model, something that's built to scale. Clearly, my old student could not bring in Alcatraz. What? So she brought in a scaled-down version, a.k.a. a model. Something that's going to represent what it's looking like, what it's talking about, specific measurements of it, but on a smaller model. Can't bring in the Eiffel Tower? No? Go ahead and bring in a model. So feel free to bring in models if you want to. The next thing is photographs. Photographs are awesome. They're the super easy way of describing and explaining and really clarifying exactly what you're talking about. So these are a wonderful representation of the work. And so any type of photograph that you use, if they're your own photos, that's fine. If it's stock photos, that's fine as well. I had a student today saying like, oh, do I need to cite all my photos, but she's doing a Swedish holiday as her informative speech, and so it's like talking, and again, this is like a basic public speaking class, not like a social justice class, it's not here. So she's doing hers on Swedish holiday, and she's talking about like the decorations and the food and the costumes. So I'm like, we would need those. You can describe them, but I would love to see them. And she's like, well, do I have to cite each one? I was like, is it like stock photos and stuff? No. If it's like somebody's personal photo or if it's a chart or a graph or something, that's when we're going to want to make a reference or who took it. Like if it's a perspective of me seeing something happen. So like, for example, if some of us are talking about like police brutality, that would be a good indicator to talk about because you'd want to know the context of whose lens was this through, what was the purpose of them representing this. That may make sense. But if it's just stock footage and stuff, that'll be okay. Drawings, if you're an excellent artist, feel free to draw. You know what I love are those videos on YouTube where somebody's describing like, so how do student loans work? And you're like, I don't know. And rather than having somebody just sit there and talk, they draw like all the stick figures. And they show how they do that. Or, gosh, what is the stock market? And they do the animations whilst describing it. Always fun. So if you are a great artiste and would like to do that, feel free to do so. Graphs and charts are a great way to illustrate your information as well. So we did graphs and charts when we went over supporting materials. Okay. Now, although this may be one of those things that you're like, really, Amanda? I'm going to say yes, really, friends. Because, I shouldn't have even switched the user. That was silly. I'm going to log this in. Is it cold?
Yeah. It's like always cold.
Of course. It was. It's been freezing all day. I thought it was going to be. I might say freezing all day. It's been just cold all day. I thought it was supposed to be like 90 today or 84 or something.
I think that's this weekend. Yeah.
Darn it! I missed it. I thought I got it. I thought I had it. You can pull up that shade too if you want. It's up to you. Make your space code use things. Like okay, let me, so while I'm talking, or while I'm doing this, I will talk to you about the next one, which is the excitement of video and audio. My friends, yes, you can totally use video and audio. And video, primarily, unless it's from your own video, oftentimes we will get it from a little place called, YouTube. Okay, good. That's usually the way that people will push forward video. If you are doing a video and you are showing a video or an audio clip, the maximum amount of time that should be designated, whether it's this speech or any other speech you give, is only 30 seconds. You should cut that down to 30 seconds at a time. Why 30 seconds? Why you think? Think about it critically. Have you ever been in a speech where they're showing long...
You'll get bored.
Okay, oh good, so there's the first one. The potential is that somebody else is now doing the work for you. They're you doing the description instead. So that's one. What else?
Because like our speech is like 45 to 6 minutes already, going longer than 30 seconds would like take up a significant portion of our speech.
Excellent. So I would totally agree with you in that as well. Showing visual aids takes time, and that's one of the guidelines here. You really do want to practice with your visual aids due to the fact that to set up, to walk over, to talk about it, to turn it off, to walk back over, all of that takes time that you need to take into account. So 30 seconds. So the fact that it's cutting into your time, but think about your audience. They're a priority. Why would 30 seconds be too long? What would it potentially do? John, go!
People also like start to lose interest.
Ah, do they? Yes, they do. Wait, what? Why is this frozen? Oh, no, everybody. It's frozen. I don't know. What do I want to do? I want to Control-Alt-Delete. Son of a nutcracker. People will lose interest, absolutely. In a third... I don't even know, y'all. Great. All right. This is the silliest way to do it, but let's just go in here. Let's finish, though, talking for one hot second about, there we go, about audiovisual. One, if you're going to show the audio visual, it should only be 30 seconds. People do lose interest over time, and by the end of the 30 seconds, it's hard for them to re-shift back into gear. The other thing is, yes, 30 seconds is too long for somebody to be describing something that you could probably do. So if you are going to show a video, don't preface it with the same material that's in the video, or after the video, follow up with the same material that's in the video. That was informative on its own. If it wasn't used to clarify something, we don't need the redundancy of whatever they're explaining and then you explaining it and then explaining it again. It doesn't make any sense. If you are using a YouTube video, that is something that you should set up beforehand. Why? Because there's nothing worse than when you start a YouTube video and you're so excited about showing somebody and you're like, okay, now wait. And then what starts? And you're like, now the momentum's all drawn out. I promise it's going to be really good. Here we go. Ready? So make sure that you run through the ad and there aren't ads. Of course it does. It happens to everyone, and it happens in front of the audience, and you never want that to happen. So we make sure that it's set to where it needs to go, and also get it set to the large screen early. Those are the important things that I would like to make note of on videos if you are going to show them. The other thing is audio. You are more than welcome to play audio clips or audio snippets. The same thing. Make sure that it's set up to the cue that you would like it to go, and make sure that individuals aren't waiting for you to set that up, and that it shouldn't take place of you. Multimedia presentations. We do not use PowerPoint in this class. I'm going to give you some guidelines on PowerPoint for the next time that you do use it in regards to like fonts and stuff and the information, but PowerPoint, although we don't use it in this class in the standard way of let me put the whole outline and let me go through on a PowerPoint, what it can be used as is a vehicle through which to show your visual aids. So let's say I have a chart and a photograph and maybe a video, then what I can do is I can put the chart and then a blank screen and then the video and a blank screen and then move from there. It's really great because if you have a lot of visuals and you don't want to keep toggling back and forth between the different mediums or having to push the projector on and off button, if we have a blank screen in our PowerPoint, it will simply become, so you can just click the button each time you go to change it.
So for this one, because of that, would you be like looking at our walking?
You can do whatever you choose, and we'll talk about that as well, because there's a walk and talk. It's like, how do I do this thing? How do I get back? Am I going to go in front of my light? I don't know what's going to happen. So we can talk about that. There's a couple different choices that you may want to practice with just to keep yourself at ease, but we'll do that for sure. So in regards to the multimedia, does that make sense to you? Use it as the vehicle through which. Anybody using Prezi still? Okay, so nauseating. I don't prefer it. It's like, where are we going? How is it in? Why am I zooming in? Where am I going back? Why is everything in a circle? I don't know. It was a great idea. I think it was a fun way to show things, but it didn't necessarily stick. The last thing is the speaker. What? You? Yes, you. You can all be the visual aid. If you ever think about somebody doing magic, what are they doing? They're themselves, right? I had a student once who was doing the tap dancing. Did I tell you about the tap dancing? What? Oh my goodness, y'all. I had the student who was doing a speech on tap dancing, like an introduction or informative on like the basics of tap dancing. And so I used to have one of these desks, but it was like super large and wide in the classroom that I was teaching. So she brought in like a big black wooden plank and she set it on there and she brought in a friend and both of them jumped up on the table. And then what did? They did a tap as an attention getter, then they got down. Then in her like second main point, it was like, and now I'd like to introduce some of the basic moves that if you know, you can parlay into any part of your tap routine. And so it was like, oh, well, you can do a flap, and she can talk about it. A flap, pushing your foot forward, pushing your foot back. I mean, if you were never doing that before, you'd be like, what? This is tap dancing? No, but what she did, she had her friend stand up while she was doing it and show it from each side, and this is how it goes, and that's what it sounds like. It was very fun and easy. So you can always use yourself as well. You can always use somebody else as a model. I had a student who was doing a flamenco dancing one time, and he invited another friend from the class to go flamenco dancing, and then they did his introduction was them to doing their dance, and then she came back up to show like specific holds and different things. It was very sweet, and I loved that they went together. I always love matchmaking in my classes. Oh, let's go back to charts and graphs. What are charts and graphs? This, my friends, are where you would describe and put forth information like yours. Oh my gosh. Statistics. Okay, so there's 3 different types. Graphs. They show statistical trends and patterns, and that's the important thing. Is that one of the we know that visual aids, we know that statistics are hard to grasp our head around. We talked a lot about putting out a lot of numbers and making you in your head understand what that percentage or what that breakdown means. Graphs and charts are a great way, especially if you're showing comparisons or just like what's the difference or how has this changed. That would be a great way to do it. So a graph in particular. We've talked about these before. You maybe did it in like 7th grade math, but these are line graphs. Line graphs, what are they? Well, line graphs, my friends, are used as 1 or more lines to show changes over time. Although you know what a line graph is, your audience may not know what a line graph is, or in fact how to read that graph. Your job is to explain to them what they're looking at, point out some of these numbers and clarify how it starts to make sense. So if you see a line, so we now know that this graph is talking about percentages of personal spending. Along the bottom, if it's changes over time, you're getting your dates. And along the top, or side, is it going to be the percentages, or the number, or the amounts, or the whatever it is that you're evaluating here. Clearly, don't ever say that with a visual aid, we can see that an individual's health care, this would actually be great for Brandon in our class, just FYI, but he's not here right now, because his speech, which you will come to find, is talking of the sweet irony of food disparity or food deserts, is that if individuals just had more access to healthy foods, their healthcare bills would go down. Because with the rise of cheap processed foods, our health, in fact, has started to go up. What's the pickle about this that we would maybe want to know? Instead of simply saying, look, our food has gone down since 1980, but our healthcare bills have certainly gone up. What do I not know about those numbers on the side? Thank you, Gavin.
Like, it doesn't even say, like, if it's dollars or cents. It doesn't say how much is it, if that's per week or per day. It doesn't give us anything, really.
Yes. Good. 10 what? $10? 10, 15? 100? Percentage of what? 100% of yours personal? How much are you already doing, right? So there's a lot that we don't know here. Especially when you start to do things like this. What's this? What is that number?
You don't know?
Nobody knows what that number is. These are the parts of visual aids that you want to be critical of. Good. And secret option 2 that you need to really walk us through. Because if this makes sense to you, these numbers and this percentage and how it's included doesn't necessarily make sense to the audience who isn't an expert. Yes?
So the scale also doesn't start at 0, so it exaggerates the trend.
Oh my gosh, look how, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great way to look at it. If it doesn't start at 0 and it starts here, let's look at how, is that gap as big as if it would have started at 0?
Like if you have a bar graph, but then you just chop it
Mhm.
right at the point where it looks like a really big disparity.
Speaking of bar graphs, should we talk about those? Why would you talk about bar graphs? So for this one is to show changes over time. Bar graphs, if we're talking about disparity, is showing the
They're different.
comparisons! Da, 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 da. So vertical or horizontal bars, they're used to show comparisons. So if we're looking at the particular comparisons here that are being used, and if we're trying to explain the disparity between, right, black and white, this is describing your median household income. It's giving us some information there. So we can start to see the percentages on that side, and then we start to see the colors showing the disparity. But what would you maybe need to point out on something like this?
Oh, what, like, is it in Los Angeles?
Ooh, I love it. We're not seeing that. Okay, good. How many people were polled? All white people? Really? And then white? What is that? I don't know. But then also, what's this? Right, so maybe giving us that subtraction itself. And then also, what does this visual aid mean in relation to your particular claim? What are you making that this would be important to note in that disparity? And then describing that and showing it, what does that help us understand more about your issue? Does that make sense, y'all? So if we're looking to show changes over time, you use a line graph. And if you want to show comparisons, bar graph. Good. And then, my favorite one, if you want to show distribution, we use a pie graph, because who doesn't like a pie? Or a pizza pie, if you will. So this uses circles to show different types of distribution. So if we wanted to make a comparison about women in the workforce and how many individuals are working and how many aren't, right? We're showing you that from 1900, where single women in the workforce was about 68%, at 2010, the percentage of women in the workforce is 28%. Interesting. But divorce doesn't change much. I wonder why. I don't know. I would need somebody to describe that in that visual aid for me. Does that make sense to you? But these are always fun. Now, should you make these on your own? Should you make visual aids on your own? Like graphs? Or, sorry, should you make graphs on your own? No! I used to love it when people would do that. They get like a box and do it and a zero and then like a crayon. I'm like, you're kidding, right? Don't do that because it can't show the literal representation. If you wanted to make your own, of course you could. If you decide that you want to start surveying our classroom and you want to put the percentages in to start showing everybody, you can do that in a simple, you could do it in your Word program, you could do it in your PowerPoint. There's so many different ways that you could do those on your own so that they accurately reflect exactly what you're talking about. The last thing here are charts. It summarizes large blocks of information. It's usually as a list. When you were younger, you may remember like they did those like behavior charts or homework charts, right? And everybody's name in the class and all the dates, and they would put stickers if you did it or not. Charts can do the same thing. I've seen very effective charts, for example, when individuals will like list out details. For example, region of birth and the percentage of U.S. immigrants that come from those places. That's something that we could do. I've seen people talk about this in regards to drunk driving and the idea of, so for drunk driving, for example, all the countries that have legal drinking age. That's always a big argument, right? So that the United States should lower the legal drinking age to 18, and then it has all the other countries in the world, and it has their percentages of like accidents, and that has the United States, and because ours is 21, and then it also has the highest rate of like accidents. It's like, oh, what's the answer? Is everybody going to point out every single country? No, that would be way too much. But you would point out ones that what? Maybe are closest to the if I'm trying to say this country and this country are the same, what's good for Belgium will be good for the United States. What's good for Chad will be good for the United States. Are those the same place? Do they have the same access to the different resources? No, it would be a terrible comparison. So you'd point out the ones that were maybe more aligned with the United States, maybe a similar demographic, maybe a similar drinking and driving law or something like that, and then put that in. Does that make sense to you? And those would be the ones that you would point out. Okay, awesome sauce. I don't want you to do anything else. That's good too. Let's cruise back on over to these guidelines, y'all. The first part of this guidelines for visual aids is talking about your preparation and while you're making them. The second part is for the presentation and how they'll be graded during your presentation. So the guidelines for visual aids, first prepare them in advance. Don't wait until the last minute to do so. I always encourage that if you're ever giving another speech in your life and within this class, that you continuously, as you're doing your pre-research, that you start to look for different types of visual aids while you're doing that. What got you interested? What got you excited? Did you see something on Facebook or social media that you're like, ooh, that's fascinating. That totally has to do with my topic. Start throwing those in a folder so that you're prepared when it comes time, that you have it ready for you. Keep visual aids simple. I cannot tell you that there is nothing worse than having 70,000 different visual aids in one speech. The speech becomes about the visual aid, and the speech is actually about the content, so keep it easy. This also includes not having 800 different types of visual aids. So it's not like I have 9 pictures, and now I have a video, and now I have a chart, and now I have a graph, and now I'm dancing up here, now I'm telling you a song. No, we just want to keep it easy. I think that I talked to you a little bit about how many, I don't know, I probably didn't. If you are going to have visual aids, how many should I have? Well, in the case of that individual who was doing their speech on Sweden, for example, that Swedish holiday, their best idea would be to have like a maximum 9. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's not like she's going to have 9 different types of visual aids, but if she did 9 different pictures, imagine if you're talking about the food and the culture and the decorations and all those things, we would want that type of illustration. And so as the individual talked about it, they could demonstrate what that is to us, but we don't want her to have too many. Make sure that your visual aids are large enough for the entire audience to see. Again, nobody can see this if I'm holding it up, or if I go like this, we can't read the text on there. However, we can if we project it in a larger format, so make sure that your audience can always see. If your audience can't see it, I can guarantee you they're not interested. Because they can't pay attention. And you're like, why do you really even care about me knowing this information, right? It kind of just sets up a goodwill. Use fonts that are easy to read. Making sure that we're using Times, Arial, Courier. Those are the ones that you should use if you are writing any information. If you were using a PowerPoint, those would be the ideal to use as well. For titles, 36 inches is appropriate. For any sub-font, 28 is appropriate. And that is a standard for eyesight in the back of the room. So, use a limited number of fonts. Keep to only 1 or 2. I would simply do 1 unless you wanted to do 1 for the title and 1 for your content, but I would still stick to 1 in that way because don't make it anything more difficult for your audience to take in. And the last thing is use color effectively. Keep colors to a minimum, and especially if you're using charts or graphs. So here's the deal. We are all very lucky in this class that we have the luxury of eyesight. However, not every individual does, and you don't always know who's going to be in your room. Therefore, it is important that when you choose color, you do so effectively. So for example, if we go back to the pie graph or the pie chart, we want to make sure that, for example, somebody who, let's use the first one, who is colorblind, can accurately read what we're giving or demonstrating to them. So if even were you doing any type of, like, let's say we're doing a bar graph and we're showing a comparison and I'm using red and green, we want to make sure that we don't merge those colors together in ways that our audience wouldn't be able to see the differentiation. The other thing about visual aids is we also don't know if people can, in fact, see the screen or see what we're talking about. So when individuals say, you can clearly see, it also becomes very odd if people can't see. So no, we can't clearly see. 2, you need to describe to us what we're supposed to be seeing. In this photograph, I would like to show or demonstrate or point out these particular features. Or we could say what the class is looking at right now, what the audience is looking at is, or what is being displayed is. And those would be great ways to communicate about what you're talking about and ensure that you're describing it and explaining it, because not everybody can see that. Sound good? All right, fantastic. Now, here we go. Here, my friends, are the guidelines for everybody and how to effectively use this. And this is where we oftentimes will get like, okay, what do I do with my hands? How do I do this? The first thing that I want to make note of is to avoid the whiteboard. It doesn't mean don't use it. It simply means really be aware of how you're using it. When an individual goes to write on a whiteboard, 1, it takes what? Time to write out all the material you want to. The other thing is that the second that I turn my back to all of you, what does that allow you to do? Get distracted. To do, yes, whatever it is that you want to do. Talk to somebody else, get distracted, check your phone, and then it takes you out of the moment. Also, what happens to my voice when I turn to the back of the classroom?
Can't hear it. It's not as loud.
Yeah, it becomes a little bit muffled and such. However, the other option is too, what you can do is you can write before your speech in that 1 minute. Then when you're ready to display, you can simply start talking about it, raise up. You're like, and then you say, what we are looking at here on the board is the most perfect smiley face you've ever seen. Big eyes, a smile with a cute little indent there on the end, and a circle. Thanks for seeing that visual aid, everybody. Now what we would like, and then you can close it back up. Does that make sense? Even if you had like a big poster or something that you couldn't put under a projector, you could always simply display it there. Also, you could just take a picture of it and put it up on visual. That could be a way to make it go. So avoid using the whiteboard. We don't want to turn our hair away from the audience, the sound. Display visual aids where listeners can see them. And that's why we have all of these resources in the classroom. You don't know if that's always going to be the case, though. Every single situation or environment that you're in is going to have a different setup for visual aids. At some of my community colleges, we have just moved away from an overhead projector with like the transparency sheets. So the technology is always going to be different in different places, and you should always get and understand like what kind of smart technology do you have in this room. Go in and practice with it early, etc. Avoid passing visual aids among the audience. Have we talked about this before? Did we talk about this? Okay, you want to avoid passing it. Why? One, did you get this? Okay, did you get this? You ever done that in class? Somebody's like passing a roll sheet? Yes, okay, so it's always that, did you get this? Then without fail, there's going to be the person who holds on to it for a little bit longer than they should. And by the time it gets passed back, the speech is over, and it's still going around for the next two speeches. The other thing is, it also gets passed around, and by the time it gets to somebody, they're like, wait, why was I looking at this again? Because the moment has passed. We're not referring to it anymore. If you wanted to pass something out, an effective way to do so would be to do it at the end of your presentation. So if we wanted to let our audience go home with something, or like, here's a bookmark that has 3 resources that you can always keep with you. Here's a self-addressed stamped envelope to the organization that I hope that each of us can put $1 in today and feed the mouths of 30 children. Agree with that? So these are different ways that you could do it. I had a student one time who did it before her speech. Did I tell you? She was like a chocolatier. She made chocolate at farmers markets. And then most sold at farmers markets. So she wanted to walk us through the different types of chocolate, and she wanted us to do a taste test while we were doing it. So what she did, she handed each of us out a Ziploc baggie, and inside were 3 different chocolates, each inside their own baggie. And they were marked like 1, 2, 3. And then she passed us each out, like on our desks, we each had a cup of water and a saltine cracker. These were all things that she had placed there in her minute before. She had a friend help her do it. And she made the claim, please leave the materials on your desk until we talk it through. But we're going to be doing a fun taste testing today, and it's going to be most effective if you try it while I'm describing it. And so as we went through, she said, okay, try this. She talked us through it. We talked about it. We felt around, we like learned how, like move it around in our mouth and like do this whole thing. And then we could clear our palate in the meantime. It was a really cool idea. Other things that I've seen are like, safe sex ones, like hand out a condom at the, I don't know, hand out like helpful hints. The self-addressed stamped envelope is one of the best ones because that's usually like, oh my God, I have it right here. So easy. Let me just do it. Somebody already gave me 25 cents. That's so nice. So there's some effective ways to do it, but try to keep it to the end or to a place where it's not going to distract your audience. The other thing is display visual aids only when discussing them. We talked about this before, but in between using your visual aids, you should always push the dark screen. So make sure that the screen is dark or muted. You only reveal it when you were talking about it, and then you turn it back off so that we don't become distracted by the visual aid rather than what you were saying. Talk to your audience, not to your visual aid. You know this from when we've spoken before about individuals using PowerPoint and how they will sit and they'll simply read off the PowerPoint the whole time. Or if there's a picture up there, they'll simply sit and look at the picture the whole time and talk about it. But what are we looking at? That's an important thing, is that we're usually supposed to look at something, not the whole of it all. So it helps if, when you show something, remember that you should refer to it and you should explain it. And you can do so Vanna White style while still looking at the audience, pointing, going forward, and describing and explaining in that way. Does that make sense, y'all? Okay, cool. So only put the visual when you're referring to it. Otherwise, take it away. give an example over and over and over again for the same claim. So think about it like, oh, it's just an example that's helping describe what I'm talking about. Explain it clearly and concisely. Don't put a visual aid up and assume that people know what you're talking about, like which we said. Explain it, describe it. What am I looking at? A picture does not speak 1,000 words. A picture cannot speak. You have to speak for it. So let's hear that description. And then I want you to make sure that you're practicing with your visual aid. A visual aid takes time to walk, to set it up, to take it down. So make sure that you're accounting for that time. Practice and pretend like you're pushing the button, like you're coming over, like you're talking to the screen. So Selena asked a great question before about how do I use this space and what am I going to be doing? Well, you are more than welcome, we're just going to leave those there for now, to use the podium if you would like to. And you can use the podium and set it up in this area so that you are, in fact, close to the visual aid. And you can do the step backs, and you don't have too far to go if you wanted to do something like this. You can set this up however you would like. The other thing that you are more than welcome to do is use the walking. But, like we said before, that it had to be, in this pyramid, it doesn't always have to go in that exact pyramid formation. So let's say it's in my second main point, right? So let's say I come out and I'm talking about this, and then I'm doing my second main point, and now I'm going to show you a visual aid. I never want to turn my back to my audience. So I can do so, and I can come back and I can show you, and then I can do something over here. But watch your light. Already too far. Why? Now you're like, what? Is it on? It's on me. Oh, better. Okay, find your light like a great actor. So you can do something like this. If you do need to walk in front because you have to show something on the other side, it's what you simply have to do. You have to walk through it, right? So you can simply walk through and show it to the other side, and now I'm explaining it a little bit more. And now I'm going to walk back. Hey, everybody's still looking at you, talking. Still looking at you talking, and pushing the button, and then I'm going to go back to right where I was before, and then I'm going to come back in. If it's on your third main point, fantastic, then you do the same thing. But if it's in, let's say, you're using a visual aid as your attention getter, then you would for sure simply want to start over here. And then if you want to do your whole introduction from here, you can, and then you can move out for your main point. You can come back for your second main point. If you have tons of visual aids during that time, it wouldn't make sense for you to keep going back and forth. So come back here for your second main point, and then you can move your space for the rest. It is 100% really up to you. The standard of a course is like the 1, 2, 3 pyramid. But if that doesn't work because it doesn't work with the visual aid, then make it work for you. If there's a ton of visual aids in your third main point, then stay over there for your third main point. And don't move again. And then come back out for your conclusion. The thing that I really want to make note of is that we never lose eye contact with our audience when we are giving these visual aids. And that's hard oftentimes, especially when we're doing the walk and talk. Let's say I'm here and I want to walk over to do my visual aid. The worst thing that I will oftentimes see, and that you will too, is this. Now let me show you a visual aid. As you can see, as we can't see, again. So then they describe it, and then they will come back over quietly. Walk and talk. There is so much that you can do. You can set up the visual aid, what you are about to see. So continuously talk to your audience and talk us through. The other thing is that people will sometimes get confused with the technology. And a great way to flub your way through those mistakes happening is to keep talking about your visual aid. You're going to need to describe it anyway, and the audience can catch up. But what you can do is you can start to talk about its explanation. Now I'm going to show you a visual aid that is going to give you a representation of what this great Arctic polar cap diminishment in fact looks like. Here you are going to see 3 different photographs. The photograph 1 is illustrating. We can now tell that this has all come to be and come to pass, and my goodness, don't we need to do something about those polar ice caps? Now that I've showed you that visual, hopefully you can't. Does that make sense? So we're walking to it. If it's a chart from somewhere, you can give your citation, but make sure that you continuously talk through it. The one thing that you do not want to say is, how does this work? Oh, I don't know how to work this technology. Why?
Show that you're uncertain.
Yeah, it shows that you're uncertain. It shows that you aren't professional, that you weren't prepared, right? Technology, it's temperamental, but you really want to have an ownership over it. And particularly with women, it's really one of the worst things that we can say. So that's a friendly reminder that we talk about this technology is own it. Don't be afraid to touch it. That's why I want you to come up here and touch. Okay. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Like, oh, how am I going to get there? What am I going to do? Where should I stand? What should I do with my hand? You walk in. Yes?
For our speeches, would we be able to use a visual aid as an attention getter?
Yes! Can't wait. Yeah, you start over here. Start with that attention getter. But you don't have to say, I'm going to show you a visual aid for my attention getter. No, no, no. You use that as your start. And once it starts, that's how it starts. Or you can preface it. But rarely will an attention getter visual aid warrant like a setup. It would usually require an after talk. And we talked about that before with supporting materials, right? That if you're using a quote or something, last time when we talked about attention getters, that if you're using a quote, you don't want to start off with the information about the quote. Did we talk about that? Yeah. It's not like you want to say, like, according to so-and-so, and the da-ba-da, and the ba-ba-ba-ba, because that start out, people will concentrate more on that attribution rather than the attention-getting quote. And in the case of the attention-getting quote, you really want to focus on that because that's what's setting up your entire speech. So instead, give your attributions after. Does that make sense? Same thing for, like, the video and the explanation and the description. Okay, good. Visual aids, but I do want to talk about one other thing. How many visual aids do you have to have? Just one. Yeah, at least one. That's it. How many is the max that you should have for a 5 to 7 minute speech? Good job, everybody. Way to go. Way to really get that one going. All right. I am going to grab this information. Nope. Nope. Yeah, we used it in my last class. To show you all is check it out, the informative speech description. Does anybody have that on them? I think I may have left it in the last class one. The informative speech description has the rubric on it. You know, actually, let me just pull it up here. Here, visual. If y'all have yet to, you can always grab the handout that I gave you, the one that has the prompt for the informative speaking. But here, under the informative speech description and handouts, if you want to go ahead and open it. So, all right, we'll just go with it like this, even though when it downloads, it's going to remove this. everybody. Let's just go through it like this. Here we go. You can all adjust. It's a perfect example of what not to do in your visual aid. Okay. This is going to be your evaluation sheet. So on your speech day, there is a checklist that goes along with the informative speech description. So you can read through that informative speech description again, but the checklist is also going to let you know what you need to bring. 1, you're required to bring your evaluation sheet. You're going to staple that evaluation sheet. It's the half-page one that I gave you last time. You're going to staple that evaluation sheet, and if you don't have one, you can download it from here, to your preparation outline. The preparation outline is the one that is the full sentence, detailed, everything that a speaker intends to say in this speech outline with that works cited page, because that's part of the outline, all stapled together and placed in numerical order. The other thing that you're going to want to bring in are your speaker's notes, 1 page front and back, or note cards, 1 for each of the main points, introduction and all of your main points and conclusion. We'll warrant 1. The other thing you don't want to forget is your visual aid. Either email it to yourself or bring it on a flash drive. You're going to save it to the desktop upon entering the classroom, and then you will be prepared and ready to go. Bring your positive attitude, because you can do it. I know it. I believe in you. I think that was it. But let's go through this rubric, because otherwise, how will you know what to do? Here's your 2 minutes. These first 4 categories are for your introduction. That is going to be worth 20 points. Everything is worth 5 points unless indicated as 10 in the parentheses. So your attention-getting step, we talked about attention getters, making them clear, making them interesting and unique, but most importantly, that they're related to the central idea. They have a purpose that's connected to your speech. Then we go into the reveal topic portion. This is where you are going to reveal the topic. Don't forget to do it. Then you're going to give us any background information that we may need to know about your speech, any technical jargon that you have to use because it's informing us to be better speakers about the information. And also, if you did not relate the topic to the audience or its importance or relevance in our lives in your attention getter, remember to make that simple statement in your introduction by saying something like, this topic is important because, this topic is going to be imperative for you to understand because, and make it clear to us there. Then you're going to give your credibility statement. Remember, how do you know what you know? Good job, everybody. How are you experts? Now, if you don't have that degree, if you don't have that certification, if you don't have that 7 years of working and training experience, you don't worry. What you do have is a passion for this topic. So remember, you're mentioning like, because, after taking blank and blank class, I started to explore and learn a little bit more, and now that has drawn me to do extensive research on this topic, and in order to provide you all with the most up-to-date current information and knowledge about it. Something like that. And then the last thing that you're always going to state is your thesis statement. Remember, we're not stating the thesis statement as if our audience isn't there. Instead, state the thesis statement as if we are there. So not saying, like, to inform my audience, you can simply change the wording around even if it feels more comfortable. Today I'm going to be giving you each some more information about blank, and I'll be doing so in this way. Or today I'd like to provide you with the knowledge of blank, and in this way. So making sure that you're hitting those 4 elements. Then we go into the next part. We have first here this organizational pattern that deals with, did I use chronological, spatial, topical order, cause and effect, or problem solution? Was it done correctly? Were each of those main points balanced in some way? Is an equal amount of time and information given to each one? Then you do have your time limit. I will be giving you a 5, I'll be giving you a 6, and then I'll be giving you a 7. At the 7, that's when it's time to wrap it up. I may not be doing it. I may designate somebody else in the class to do it, but keep that in mind that you do have the 7 minutes. Practice that. Practice with your introduction. Practice with your visual aid to make sure that you're hitting that within the appropriate amount of time. Then we have our main points and support, making sure that all the information that is within those main points is clear, that it's defined, that it's descriptive, that it's written in complete sentences, that you're utilizing different types of supporting material. Then we have this idea of reasoning, and although we haven't gotten into reasoning yet in regards to how that makes sense to persuasion, all that I'm going to be evaluating you on in regards to this reasoning is that you have somehow followed up any outside sources. Make sure that you explain your outside sources. What do those mean in relation to your central idea. I don't want you to set up your quote, then give the quote, then tell us what the quote is. Like, that's like redundant. You're setting it up by telling us, then the quote itself is telling us, then you're summarizing what I just said. Too many things. You can set up the quote and then give the quote, but now you should describe what that means in relation to your central idea, or what that statistic means in relation to the main point and overall with your central idea. Does that make sense, y'all? Okay, cool. Then here we have our transitions, making sure that they're not only utilized before each of your main points, but also within and as your subpoints. Here is your evidence that it's well thought out, that it's researched, that you've given attributions to it, that I'm hearing out loud 3 different sources, and I'm hearing the author, author's title, publication, article title, year, or some sort of that information, that the credibility is established. Then you've also let me know, is it a summary, a paraphrase, or a direct quotation? Good. Then we have our visual aids here. It's worth 5 points as well. They're well planned, they're clear, they're appropriate, they're unique. You've described them, you've played along with all those guidelines. And then here it gets into a little bit of our delivery aspect. So 10 points here is something called the dynamics. What does it mean to be dynamic? It means constantly. Good job, everybody. It's changing constantly. Okay, good. So this idea of dynamics, enthusiasm doesn't have to mean that you're bouncing up and down and smiling. Oftentimes, the speech is not going to require you to bounce up and down and smile. But enthusiasm doesn't have to always be like, yay! Instead, enthusiasm can be a portrayal of energy, can be a portrayed through our bodies and how interested we are and passionate we are about a topic. Then it is your manner and poise. If you have a sickness, if you have an illness, if you are nervous, if you make a mistake, do not tell us. Keep that poised. Instead, you can simply reshape the mistake. Bring your bottle of water up with you. Don't tell us you're nervous. We can't tell either. So keep those ideas to yourself and see how you can shift without having to express it to us to diminish any of that credibility. We also want to make sure that you are conversational. What does that mean? Oh, you're delivering extemporaneously, everybody, like we're having an everyday conversation. Then we have our vocal quality. Is your rate appropriate? If you're talking too fast, you may want to either slow down, write those notes on your note cards, be like, tell a friend to be like this in the back of the room. I don't know. But also, you will automatically speak quicker with your energy, so do that. Make sure that you're timing yourself. Watching for vocalized pauses. Remember, if you want to get rid of those, the easiest way to do so is to simply make somebody stop you. Every time you say, start back at the beginning. I guarantee you will start to think before you speak. It's a crazy idea. And you will not say them. And even if you speak a little bit slower, it's okay. Because you've at least eliminated any words that are not going to help me understand what you're talking about any further. Verbal quality pronunciation. Making sure that we are pronouncing things correctly. Remember, we talked about this in regards to any technical terminology. If you're supposed to be an expert, then you better be explaining it as you are the expert, and experts would never mispronounce something. But the other thing about pronunciation is that it can ruin the information that your audience is getting. Because if we think you're talking about one thing, but it's just mispronounced, and you're talking about something else, make sure that those two things are together. I had a student one time who did that. I'll explain it later. What I also want you to know about this pronunciation thing, and I told you before, is that last names are also available for pronunciation now as well. So the authors, don't tell us you don't know how to pronounce their name, those authors. If they're scholars in your work, you should know how to do so. Google pronunciation of that name, and it'll pronounce it for you so that you can properly do so. Use of language, don't swear, or use slang, or use the word etc. or stuff like that. I don't know what stuff is, and I don't know etc. Just cut off the sentence, period. Then we have gestures, posture, movement, appearance. Again, that are gestures, that we're utilizing them in some way, that our posture is communicating our sense of confidence and knowledge, that our movement, that we are constantly connected with our audience, that we aren't, in fact, turning our back to it, that we're not swaying back and forth or doing anything like that. And our appearance, you know that it's casual, just don't look like you woke up, no hats, no logos. Good job, everybody. Eye contact and expression, making sure that we're connecting with our audience, that we're giving some kind of facial expression. And again, not always needing to do this, but instead it's like, am I sad, am I happy, am I angry? At least try to communicate that, if not with your face, then, in fact, with your voice. And then the last thing here is your conclusion. You want to make sure that you give that signpost let's close, let's wrap it up, whatever. Then the summary. Remember, you repeat your thesis, but you also repeat your thesis with, we talked about this last Thursday. What? You have to repeat one key idea from each main point. You remember that? Mm-hmm. When you go through it, remember, give a highlight of what that main point was. What is the one thing you want them to remember? Is it the example? Is it the story? Is it the statistic? And then you refer back to your attention getter. Wrap it all up in a bow. What do we know now that we didn't know at the end? And that conclusion is worth 10 points as well. You all are awesome! And you can